Hey, welcome back to the Owolabi podcast. Now, I'm excited today because we're talking about something that I know that you've seen before. I know that you've experienced it, and when it happened, you asked the same question that I asked. How in the world does this happen? You have been at the supermarket, or you've watched YouTube, maybe like you're watching right now, or you've listened to a podcast and you've heard a story or whatever, but the story is the same. And the reaction is the same, even though the situation might be different. Let me lay it out for you. It's a story of a prominent leader, a coach, leader of a company, somebody who's famous, that's a cultural leader, a politician. And then all of a sudden there's a moment of implosion. We're like, what? They did what? I can't believe they said what? And there's this moment of shock that you cannot believe that this behavior is coming from this particular person. And if you're like me and like everyone else around the world, you immediately rush to judgment. And you're like, well, this person must have just had a snap moment of decision-making, or this person must just be rotten to the core all along. And you make these quick judgments. And then just like everyone else, you sort of move on, right? Like, oh, okay, so who won the Oscars? You just move on to the next topic, and that person's life is in shambles. But the reality is, as a leader, you and I are susceptible to moments like that. The higher you go in leadership, the likelihood of you making a catastrophic mistake that then torpedoes your leadership, hurts your company, destroys your church, hurts your credibility in the community, hurts your country, that tends to go up. The more responsibility you have, the higher the chances of, if you do make that catastrophic mistake, lots and lots of people will be hurt in the process. In today's episode, we're talking specifically about this idea. We're talking about the emotional drivers behind bad decisions. Why do smart people sometimes drive themselves directly towards self-sabotage? Why does that happen again and again and again? And how you can avoid that as you're leading something that is making a difference in your community, in your country, in the world. We're going to talk about that today, and we're going to break down the different ways that people sabotage themselves. But first, we're going to start by telling you a story that you might have already heard. It's a story that starts in the state of Michigan. Now, if you're familiar with Michigan, they have an incredible football team called the Michigan Wolverines. And just literally in 2025, there was a story of a guy named Sharon Moore. He was the coach of the Michigan Wolverines. And his story starts with probably an incredible moment where he was the assistant coach for a championship team. And then all of a sudden the head coach leaves and he becomes the head coach. He's fairly young. He's got a young family. He has all this opportunity ahead of him. And he has the hopes and dreams of an entire state right behind him. Here's the thing, though. Less than a year later, Sharon Moore is sitting in a jail cell. One of the highest, most dramatic falls from grace that we've seen in our culture anytime recently, in the last decade or so. The thing with Sharon Moore is that a series of mistakes led him to jail. It wasn't just the fact that he was having an ongoing affair with his executive assistant. It wasn't just that. It wasn't just that he was hiding it from his entire team, but it was an open secret, and everybody in the locker room and everyone in the front office kind of knew it was happening. It wasn't just that when he was confronted by his superior and asked point blank if he was having an affair with this woman. Both of them were confronted. It wasn't that he openly lied about it. It wasn't that the fact that after he was fired, he went directly to the woman's house and tried to commit suicide right there in front of her, threatening to hurt himself and make her watch. It wasn't just the fact that he almost gave her a $40,000 raise and misappropriated funds and drew attention to that and made people wonder what the heck was going on. It wasn't the fact that he was arrested and thrown in jail. It wasn't that. It was a culmination of all of those things. It was the fact that to become a leader at that high of level, one of the things that absolutely comes with it is the importance of having rock solid character. To handle the pressure at that level without making unbelievably horrible mistakes, you have had to have built your character over time, again and again, going through rounds and rounds and rounds of clarifying questions, asking yourself who you are, making sure you do the right thing again and again and again. Because when you get to a high level of leadership, what happens is leadership doesn't create challenges. It clarifies your challenges. It shows what's already in you. One of my favorite quotes is from an author named Ruth Haley Barton, and she says this. She says, part of the reason that leadership is a crucible is that if we stick in leadership past the initial moment of euphoria and excitement, the demands of long-term leadership eventually push you and push me to a place where our patterns are clearly revealed. If you stick in leadership long enough, you're going to start to see your cracks. You're going to start to understand where your mistakes are. And it's your job to address them or to ignore them. The best leaders address them. The worst leaders ignore them. And so for the rest of this podcast, we're going to talk about the hidden emotional drivers that drive great leaders to make bad decisions. Why do smart leaders self-sabotage? One hidden emotional driver that leads people to sabotage their leadership is the distinction between faith-based leadership and fear-based leadership. Now, when we talk about faith-based leadership, we'll start with the positive. It's really all about believing that you are enough for the role. Your job as a leader is to serve. Your job isn't to aggrandize yourself. Your job isn't to try to make yourself look better. Your job isn't to posture and make you sure you have all the right answers. Your job is to serve. Do the very best you can with what you've got for the people in front of you. You're going to become the best version of yourself for the sake of the people around you. That's what faith-based leadership means. And so essentially, you're the kind of person that says, okay, this might be difficult today, but we can figure this out. I'm going to try. I'm going to do everything I can, and everything I can is all I can do. And then I'm going to let it go. You have faith in the process. You have faith that God made you enough for the moment, and you're going to lean on that, and you're not going to go to bed with a ton of anxiety. I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. Faith-based leadership oftentimes is visionary, where you're able to look people in the eye and say, things might be hard today, but if we work hard together, it will be better tomorrow. And you've got confidence in the people around you, confidence in your abilities, confidence that you'll do the best you can, and the result will be what it is. You trust the process, you trust God to give you everything you need, and then you keep moving forward. That's what faith-based leadership is. It's not Pollyannish. It's not saying, hey, there's no problems out there, or I'm just going to hope everything goes well. No, you're going to work hard. You're going to look at the challenges right there in front of you, but you're not going to cower in fear. You're going to take risks in faith, and you're going to keep moving forward. Now, that's faith-based leadership. Fear-based leadership is different. Fear-based leadership, and you know you're experiencing fear-based leadership when you are overwhelmed with pessimism. Everything is terrible. Nothing can turn out well. Even when things are good, things are bad. Like you just are overwhelmed with fear, and that leads to pessimism. Oftentimes, whenever you're dealing with fear-based leadership, you have an overwhelming sense of anxiety. Every single day, you're thinking about what people think about you. Do they see that you don't know what you're doing? What do you do if things don't go right? And you're overwhelmed with thinking about future catastrophe as opposed to present challenges. You're not dealing with the issues right there in front of you because you're thinking about what happens if it all goes wrong. That's fear-based leadership. Oftentimes it leads to pessimism, and that sort of bleeds in to the way that you lead. You're controlling. We'll talk about that in a second. You're anxious. Your whole team can feel that emotional pressure. On the other side, you're also not just pessimistic. On the other side, you often avoid challenges. People who are fear-based oftentimes avoid confrontation. You avoid difficult conversations. You avoid opportunities to really address real critical issues because you don't want conflict, because you want to make sure that things look like they're good, even though they're not good. You're obsessed with posturing. You're obsessed with pretending. You're obsessed with how people think of you. And because of that, it leads you to constantly avoid the hard conversation. That's fear-based leadership. There's a big difference between faith-based leadership and fear-based leadership, and that's one hidden driver of self-sabotage. Another hidden emotional driver to lead leaders to self-sabotage is the idea of hidden wounds. Now, this is important for you to understand. We all have gone through things when we were growing up. Nobody had a perfect childhood. Everybody grew up on Earth, and Earth has lots and lots of issues. And so you probably ran into somebody who hurt you, or you did something to hurt somebody else, or you created emotional mechanisms to handle the challenges that were coming at you, and you're still holding on to those emotional mechanisms. Whatever it is, we all have what you might call wounds growing up. Now, the truth is, as you grow up as a leader, it's really important that you address those, that you pay attention to those. One of my favorite quotes is this. It's this idea that the wounds that God doesn't heal, others will eventually feel. I'll say that again. The wounds that God doesn't heal, others will eventually feel. At some point, it will come out. At some point, the people around you will suffer because you haven't dealt with the things inside you. And it'll come out in some very specific ways. You can see it in leaders who are leading themselves, driving themselves towards self-sabotage. There are signs, there are signals, there are signposts along the way that say, this isn't going to end well. If this leader keeps moving down this path, this isn't going to end very well for him. Let me give you a few of them. One of the emotional drivers is control. Now, control is an insidious one because oftentimes in order to excel as a company, to excel as a church, to excel in your community, you've got to have a certain level of excellence. You got to do things well. You got to take your job seriously. And you have to have a team of people who take their job seriously. And it means that you want to pay attention to the details. You want to control the small things. You want to control the things that are controllable. But here's the challenge. There are moments where it tips over into dysfunction, where it becomes something that isn't constructive but destructive in your company and in your community and in your church. It's one of those things that as a leader, if you realize that you are controlling too much, you're starting to stifle the people around you. You're hiring great people to do incredible work and you won't let them do great work. In fact, good people are leaving because you're finding a way to sabotage their work by holding on to too much control. That's when you know you're in trouble. It's almost like imagine a ship in the middle of a hurricane, and you've got a captain, and he's got a very well-trained, highly experienced crew, but he won't give them an opportunity to do their thing because he is clutching the helm and turning it for all it's worth and trying to control every element of the ship, when in reality, he's got a great team that can do it without him. You see, the truth is oftentimes people's wounds from long ago prevent them from trusting people in moments of pressure. And so what they do is they grab the helm and they hold it tightly. And everyone around can tell there's something wrong right now. This leader's operating in a way that's totally different than how they normally operate. Well, the truth is the pressure's on and all of a sudden the wounds become clear and they don't really trust anyone. And so they're holding onto the helm as tightly as they possibly can. If you're holding on to control too tightly, it's absolutely critical not only to acknowledge the fact that you're holding on to control, but asking yourself the question behind the question, which is not why am I controlling so much, but why don't I trust the people around me? What is it about me that's preventing me from trusting others in moments of pressure? That's the critical question. And leaders who don't answer that are driving themselves directly to self-sabotage. The second one we see all the time, this one is perfectionism. Now, you'll find people who really just kind of use it as a joke. They're like, I'm a perfectionist. I really just like to see things perfect. And, I just really think it's really important. And perfectionism is fine in some situations. Again, going back to the idea that in order to lead a great company, a great church, a great community, you have to have a high level of excellence. Things need to be right. And it's important that things are right. But the idea that perfectionism is really a secret wound comes from the idea that oftentimes, leaders who are insecure think everything is about their identity. Everything is about them. Every result is a reflection on who they are as a person. And so as a result, they control every single detail because they're trying to protect their identity in the process. If something goes wrong, it's not the thing that was wrong, it's they that are wrong. And so they feel that deep sense of perfectionism, and they call it perfectionism, but really what it is protectionism. They're trying to protect themselves more than anything. The leader that can allow their team to make mistakes, the leader that can use mistakes as an opportunity to grow and recognize there needs to be opportunities for leaders to go out and do things on your team, for leaders to go out and do things and make mistakes and come back and learn and grow. The person who recognizes that is the person who's letting go of perfectionism and, more importantly, letting go of protectionism. And they're allowing other people to make mistakes and do things. The third one is avoidance. Now, this is the third area of self-sabotage because it really has a lot to do with your inability to handle hard conversations. Oftentimes, people who are going through difficult seasons and there's a lot of pressure, they have to have a lot of hard conversations in the process. And so what they do, instead of actually having a direct, hard conversation and not avoiding the issue and going directly at it, what they do is what I like to call hinting and hoping. They hint to the person in front of them that, hey, well, maybe you should change your behavior, or maybe this isn't going very well, or maybe you should try a different approach. They hint, and then they hope that the person gets it. Instead of having a direct conversation and saying, here's the problem, here's what I want you to do, here's what's going to happen if it doesn't work, here's what's going to happen if it does work. Instead of having that direct conversation, you skirt around it. Well, what happens over time is that your culture starts to erode. What happens over time is that people stop trusting you because they don't know if what you're telling them is the accurate truth. They think you're avoiding the hard conversation. Because there will be a moment where things all come to a head. The conversations that you've never had over the last couple of years or last couple of months, the things that you've never corrected over the last couple of weeks or the last few days, those all come to a head. And when they do, there's almost always some sort of explosion. Somebody explodes at you, you explode at them, something happens with your customers, something happens in the community, something happens in the church. There's some sort of massive explosion because of the pent-up energy over time of ignoring all those major issues. And then what happens in moments like that is that you catastrophically lose credibility. Because you didn't handle the small conversations over time, now you've got a big, hairy mess. And people are left asking, well, why didn't you deal with this when it was small? Why didn't you deal with this when this was a small deal? And oftentimes leaders who avoid conflict and avoid confrontation, they don't have a great answer. The last sign of unresolved wounds is aggression. Now, it is hard being a leader. We've talked about this a lot on this podcast. I mean, there's a lot of perks to it for sure. You get to make a difference in the world. You get to see your work actually move the needle. All that is incredible. But you also take a lot of bullets. You also take a lot of arrows in the back. Oftentimes, people will criticize you publicly, and oftentimes it's very, very hard to handle. Dealing with public criticism, oftentimes personal criticism from someone who doesn't understand all the information or someone who is a little more immature and saying things that they might regret tomorrow morning, but they're saying it directly at you in a public way. Sometimes those moments are really, really hard to deal with. If you have hidden wounds, instead of responding with empathy or care or grace or whatever, you'll respond with aggression. You'll come directly at them and you go directly for the jugular because you've got a reputation to protect. You've got an identity to protect. When you're dealing with hidden wounds, oftentimes aggression is the very first and hardest reaction that you'll give when somebody confronts you publicly. One of the most prominent examples of this is Will Smith. Some of you are familiar with Will Smith. He was a cultural leader for decades, and he was publicly humiliated at the Oscars. His wife was the subject of a joke. He didn't like how it went. And so on live TV, he got up out of his seat and he went on stage and he literally physically assaulted the man who made the joke on live TV. And then he went back and sat back down. Now, he might have sat down and the rest of the Oscars went on, but his career did not. And that was a dramatic, personally traumatic moment for him. Now, the truth is that wasn't the first time that moment had happened. This was a progression of small decisions over time, not dealing with moments of anxiety or fear or frustration over years that led to the very moment where he was the kind of man who would be capable of physically assaulting another man on stage, right? And he lost his leadership credibility in an instant. The reality is all of those levers, all of those moments when you recognize that you were over-controlling or you are dealing with perfectionism or you are avoiding issues or you're dealing with unneeded and unnecessary aggression, all of those point back to the same thing, that you have unresolved wounds that need to be healed. Because again, what you won't let God heal, others will feel. Now, one of the common characteristics of leaders who self-sabotage is that oftentimes they are dealing with issues like we've been talking about on this podcast today and even in past podcasts. There's real issues behind the scenes. There's real cracks in their armor. But what happens to people over time is they start to think that success will actually solve their insecurity issues. What happens is success pours fuel on top of those insecurity issues. It amplifies it. Success doesn't change the fact that you're insecure. It just makes it worse. Success doesn't heal your wounds. They often make it worse. And that's why it's so critical before you get into moments of major leadership to start working on those inner wounds beforehand, finding people who can help you think through it, help you talk through it, help you pray through it, so that when you get to the position where you're actually able to influence lots and lots and lots of people, your influence will be positive and continuously positive and not negative and detrimental. We've covered a lot in this podcast, but here's the thing. You and I are susceptible to moments where we might make mistakes. We might make mistakes that we wish we could take back. The best insulation against making catastrophic mistakes that self-sabotage your leadership is being surrounded by people who are honest, who are authentic, leaders who are open about their struggles, leaders who are striving to be the best version of themselves while also recognizing they could make mistakes just like anybody else, and in humility are constantly working to be the best version of themselves in the service of others. One of the clearest things that you can do to avoid these catastrophic mistakes beyond just recognizing the patterns is surrounding yourself with a community of great leaders. That's why I love leading branches. It's an international community of executives, owners, and entrepreneurs who are building businesses and organizations that are designed to benefit their community. And it's all about community. It's all about coming together and recognizing that if the leader is healthy, if you are healthy as a leader, you can do far more in your community than you could on your own. And there's a lot of great other communities around the world. I just love Branches because I happen to be the co-founder. But it's an organization that makes a big difference. And I would encourage you to find one and plug yourself in. That's one of the best ways you can prevent those moments of real self-sabotage.